What's up, Covalence friends? Today we're going to be working with floating point numbers, and we're going to show you just how inconsistent they are when you work with them in JavaScript. Let's get right into it. Alright, so we're starting with the Express template, and we're only really using this because we want TypeScript support, and it's a little bit nicer, comes out of the box. So we're going to open up our index.html. We are going to change the title, so instead of Express Basics, we'll call it floating point numbers, and we're going to remove this header. So we're going to make it a container div, and inside this we'll put our h1 and we'll say add the inputs below, and we'll put another div that's going to wrap our inputs. Now we could do type number or type text. It really doesn't matter since we're going to be converting back and forth between numbers and text anyway, but let's go ahead and just keep it as a type text, and then we're going to add a span with a little plus, and then we can kind of copy that, change this to an equals, and then we'll add one more input after that, right? So we're going to have input plus another input equals the final input, and we can go ahead and add an ID to this. So we'll call this op1. All right, we'll call this op2, and then we'll call this answer, and underneath this we'll have a button container. Inside our button container, we'll have a button that'll say check, and we can add an ID to this as well. We'll just call this ID check as well. And then underneath that, we will put our result. So we're given an ID result, and we're not going to put anything inside of it just because we're going to just change the text content in that, right? So basically, we are going to check this equation, and then we're going to put the result down here, right? So when we click the button, it's going to check this equation to see if it's correct, and we're going to put incorrect or correct based off of that. So we have everything we need in the DOM now. Let's go ahead and add some quick styling. So let's start with the body. We'll say padding, we'll give it 1em, and then margin 0. The H1, we don't need it to be green. We'll just say font weight bold. We have a container class. We'll say width 30ems, max width 100%, and margin 0 auto. And we can also text align center as well. Then we have our button container. Our button container, we'll just give it some margin top. We have our inputs, so we can say all the inputs inside the container we want to, and we can move this above the button container just to kind of keep all the containers together. And we'll say width 5ems, and we could also text align these centers as well, why not? And then for the spans, so we'll say containers, all the spans in the container, we'll say margin 0 on the top and left, and then 0.5ems on the left and right. So when you have two arguments in here, it's the top and bottom, and then the left and right for the second. Finally, we have our result, and the result we will say, margin top 1em, and font weight bold. All right, so this is a decent start. We may need to add a couple things, but I think this will be fine at first. And so we can go ahead and pull up our app.ts, and we can go ahead and just kind of remove this console.log here. Let's go ahead and run this, so npm run dev. All right, so it looks good. We will pop open a browser and just check what this looks like, add the inputs below. Looks good in here. We'll leave the console to open just to kind of check for any errors. But again, we will put some numbers in here, and then we'll check, and then we should get a result. But obviously, we have not hooked up anything or any event listeners, so we'll leave the default styling for the button. I'm not too worried about that. You guys can make it pretty if you want. Send us your most beautiful DOM if you don't mind. We will feature it. But anyway, let's start adding some variables real quick, and let's see, we have op1, op2, answer, check, and result. So we'll just go ahead and grab all those. So we can say const op1l equals document.getElementById op1. And then we have a bunch of these. So we have op2l, we have answer L, and that's just answer. We have a check button, which was just check, and then we have result L, which was result, and then I believe that's all of them, right? Yes. All right. So we actually get this cast as an HTML element or null. So let's go ahead and manually cast these to HTML input elements. That's op1, op2, and answer. Now, you could do it that way, or you could do it like this as well. So TypeScript supports both. You have the as syntax, or you have the bracket syntax. Now, the as syntax works better for things like React because of JSX, TSX style stuff. But I'm more partial to this. I really don't know why. It might just be, you know, the way I grew up or the way I learned to code. But this just seems more natural to me for some reason. I don't know. I have no clue why. But regardless, let's go ahead and just continue. So we have our check button. We have our result L. We can just do a quick little, you know, if not result L, or not op1 L, or not op2 L, or not answer L. Just check all these real quick. We can console.log, element not found, and we'll return. This would really just be for the developer since all of these should exist. And now we have TypeScript will implicitly believe that this is an HTML element now. So if you just look at result L, right, we will see that it is an HTML element. It is not HTML element or null. So let's go ahead and grab our check button and add an event listener. Now it automatically adds this question mark. So if it doesn't exist, obviously the event listener is not going to work. So that would be the first thing we could check. We could add this check button to this as well. So, I mean, let's go ahead and do that, and you'll see what happens. So if not check button, now if we actually do check button.add event listener, it's not going to add the question mark. So either way would work. If you want it to be more explicit and you want to get that console.log, add it there. If not, you know, you could just leave it and have the question mark. But we have the click event listener now. Let's go ahead and grab the values. So we will have op1 equals number. We're going to cast it to a number, and it's going to be op1l, op1l dot value. All right, and then we're going to have op2, which is going to be op2l dot value. We're going to have our answer, which is answer l dot value. And finally, that is all we need, but we can say that our add equals op1 plus op2, and then we say if add equals answer, we do one thing, else we do another. And so basically what we're going to do here is we're going to say result L dot text content equals something. If it does equal, then we will say correct. We will say op1 plus op2 does equal answer. All right. Otherwise, we'll say something similar. Just copy and paste that whole thing, and we will change this to incorrect, and we will say op1 to op2 actually equals add, right? Equals add, not answer. All right, so now we have all the values displayed to the screen, and we should be able to go ahead and run this now. So let's go ahead and do 2 plus 4 equals 6. Check, and we get correct. 2 plus 4 does equal 6. Now what happens if we put 7? All right, incorrect. 2 plus 4 actually equals 6, not 7. All right, so it looks to be working correct. Let's try, 4 plus 4. 4 plus 4 actually equals 8, not 7. But if we put 8 in there, 4 plus 4 does equal 8. All right, so everything's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and just zoom in a little bit just so you guys can see that better. All right, the issue really comes in with, with integers, everything's fine. It seems to work perfectly. Now, the issue actually comes when we want to do floating point numbers. So if we put 0.2 and 0.4, all right, it should equal 0.6, right? This should be a correct statement, but when we check it, we actually get incorrect. 0.2 plus 0.4 actually equals 0.600000001, not 0.6. Now, I'm not great at math, but I know for a fact that it does actually equal 0.6, right? This is basic math, and we know for a fact that that is correct, right? So JavaScript is actually incorrect in how it's doing this, right? Now, at first, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but actually it is a huge deal, right? You're saying, oh my God, that's such a small change. But the way that JavaScript actually represents floating point numbers is it's still a binary encoding. And so the same way that we can't really represent fractions, like 1/3, for instance, like we can't write down 1/3 as a decimal because, you know, no matter how many threes, it gets 0.3 repeating, right? No matter how many threes we put, there's actually still more threes after it, right? And so there's no actual way for us to write, you know, 1/3 as a decimal, and so there's no actual way for JavaScript to represent some decimals as well, just based off its encoding alone. And so we actually have little issues, right? So if you were doing comparisons, you're gonna get, you know, it's gonna jump into the wrong blocks of code because it's actually not going to compare this correctly, right? Like this value, 0.2 plus 0.4 is actually greater than 0.6, or at least JavaScript sees it that way, which is not correct, right? And so we have a big issue, especially when you come to things like financial data, percentages, and that kind of thing, right? And so the way that you really need to handle something like this, especially with financial data, the best way to do it is to convert everything to an integer, perform mathematical operations on integers, and then convert it back to a decimal if you need to, right? I mean, if you're storing financial data, you want to store it as cents, not dollars, right? But financial data is a little bit simpler because you have a significant digit like precision factor there, right? So your precision level is 2 after the decimal. And so you know for a fact that you could always multiply by 100, divide by 100 if you needed to, right? So financial data is actually a little bit easier to work with. Now, percentages you would think are the same, right? You would think, oh, well, 20%, 40%, you just store it as a whole number. Now, that's fine, as long as you're always dealing with whole percentages. Now, sometimes you might have user inputted percentages, right? Or you may not know how many precision points you need for a percentage because it might be user input, it might be something that you're getting from, you know, another client or application altogether, but you might have 12.5%, you might have 12.125%, right? And so as that precision gets greater, you can't just multiply by a static number. You can't multiply by 100 divided by 100 anymore, right? Because you're still going to be working with floating point numbers. And so what you really need to do is you need to use a different data structure altogether. And the way that we handle this is that you can do it based off strings. You could create a library that handles it, you know, string based and stores everything as strings and whatnot, or you can use what already exists. So there's actually a package called decimal.js that allows you to do a lot of this functionality that I'm talking about, right? I mean, it has a whole bunch of methods on this thing, right? Everything from simple add, divide, modulus, multiply, you know, subtract, that kind of thing, all the way to inverse hyperbolic cosine, right? Inverse hyperbolic tangent. Definitely going to be using that a lot, right? But regardless, it has a whole bunch of functions and methods that you can use to accomplish what you need to on floating point numbers, right? And so this is the library that we're going to use and install. So let's go back to our code here. We're going to stop the the server real quick, and we're going to npm I decimal.js, and we're going to save it. All right, so we installed decimal.js, and now what we need to do is actually import this. Now, the problem is if we were using a module loader, right? We're actually in Node by default, it does do common JS loading, right? So it actually loads modules. Now, this is our front end. We're not using a module loader like Webpack or Browserify. I highly recommend starting to use one. I prefer Browserify. Most people prefer Webpack. It's kind of all just, you know, personal preference there. We're not using one here, and I'm not going to install one and configure it just to show you this. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a hack here. So we're actually going to create a new file, and we're going to call it models.d.ts. We are going to import decimal from, actually we'll call it decimal type, from decimal.js, right? And then we're going to declare our global namespace, right? And we are going to now create our window interface. And on our window interface, we're going to put our decimal, which is now going to be on the window. We're actually going to import it. We're going to grab our JavaScript from our own server. And it's going to be type of decimal type, right? So now we should actually have this on the window. And what we need to do now is we need to actually add a script tag for it. So we're going to import our decimal.js. All right, and now what we need to do is we need to change our server to allow us to do this, right? And so we're going to open up our routers folder, and we are going to open up this index.ts. And right now we're only serving static files from public. So we're going to add another GET request, and it's going to be for, the root decimal.js. So when we're requesting this exact file, we're not going to look in public. We're going to look in node modules/decimal.js, right? So now we're going to look in this folder for this file, which does exist. If we were to open that up, I could actually show you this real quick. So we're going to reveal this. We can see that node modules, we have decimal.js, and then we have the file decimal.js. So you need to make sure that you're actually, creating the correct path here for it. But unless I did something wrong, this should actually properly request this now, right? All right, so now we can go ahead and we can add that decimal.js into this file here. So what we're going to do, instead of casting this to a number, we're actually going to cast this to a window.decimal, right? Oh, and we actually have to new this up. All right, so we're going to new window.decimal, and this is going to create a decimal type, so we can't actually just add it anymore. So what we want to do is we want to do op1.add, right? So we have the TypeScript function still, and we're going to add op2, right? So now add is going to be a decimal, so we can't just compare. We can't do a strict comparison with the answer anymore. So we're going to do add.equals answer. And it's all the exact same thing as before, right? We were doing strict comparison equals before. Now we just have a function to do that, right? And so this equals returns a Boolean. You can see the return type for that function is a Boolean. And it's returning whether or not add equals answer, right? And add is just op1.add op2. Now, we could new up this one as a new decimal, right? This function actually takes in a decimal.value, which could be either a decimal type, it could be a number type, it could be a string. So we could actually just do this directly, right? But we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to leave it as a number. We can see that we are, converting this back to a string. Op2 is a number converted to a string. Op1 is going to be a decimal type converted to a string, but it's just going to call the toString function that should just put back the number as a string into the DOM, right? And so that shouldn't be an issue. Everything should still work perfectly fine, except now we should be able to just solve our issue of the actual decimal points. So we're going to do the npm run dev, and we're going to wait for that server to start up. We're going to go back to our application. Now we can see that 0.2 plus 0.4 does not equal 0.6. We're getting an incorrect value here. But if we refresh the page and we do 0.2 plus 0.4 equals 0.6 now, and we check that, we actually get correct, right? So using the decimal data type, it does correctly add the fractions, right? So if we were to go, no matter how far we go in here, if we check this, we can actually see that incorrect 0.25 plus 0.4 actually was 0.65, right? So it is getting the correct value no matter what we put in here, right? So it actually equals 0.653. 0.653, checked, correct. 0.253 plus 0.4 does equals 0.653. So now we actually are doing the math correct, right? And so I highly recommend whenever you're working with decimals, the first go-to would be not working with decimals, but if you need to work with decimals, use a package like decimal.js. All right, so I hope all that made sense, and I hope you guys enjoyed that and even learned a little something today. If you guys have any additional questions or requests for content, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure that you come back and see us, because we will be back with more content soon enough.